Welcome to Jajar Radio Station podcast. This is your host, Roy. I'm with Brother James this morning. We are doing podcasts that hopefully will help you in your walk and talk with God. I don't know when it was the last time that you walked with God, or I don't know if you talked to Him today, but we would like to help you in that direction. We're coming to you from Kankakee, Illinois, located about 50 miles south of Chicago. And Brother James and I believe that a podcast or two per week, W-E-E-K, makes the devil weak, W-E-A-K. If you know about Jesus and you believe in Him, we would encourage you to share this podcast with other people who either know about Jesus or don't know about Him. If you only know Jesus by His name and you're not sure who He is or what He has done for you, we invite you to listen to this podcast, go to church this weekend, talk to a pastor when you have an opportunity to do so, or talk to a Christian friend. Another thing you could do is you could email me at rwcortis68@att.net. If you do that, in the subject area of your email, if you would put the word podcast, that would help me know where it is coming from, and I would be happy to respond to you, to answer any questions that you might have, to help you connect with someone who knows about Jesus, or just simply to communicate with you. I had served as a Lutheran school principal for 33 years, and then after I retired, I had the opportunity to work in a nursing home. That nursing home had independent living, a regular nursing home, and an Alzheimer's unit. I went there as a marketing and personnel director, and because I am classified as a minister of religion for being in the Lutheran schools for those 33 years, when a nurse who was teaching a class about dementia and Alzheimer's to all of the workers, she left and took another job. So the director asked me if I would be willing to teach that class. That class has to be taken by each CNA, nurse, people who work in dietary, custodians, everybody who works in the building, so that they know how to react and how to be able to determine how to help people with Alzheimer's or dementia. There was a place called Faith Place that kept Alzheimer's patients. And it was a place that I came to love because of my role there. Occasionally, I would go down there and sing a few songs, have a short devotion with them before lunch, talk to individuals there. But I also had the opportunity once a month to teach about dementia and Alzheimer's. I don't know if you have a spouse, a loved one, a friend, somebody suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. I did learn during that time period that dementia is really like the first step of Alzheimer's, or one of the first steps of Alzheimer's. Does not always occur first. Alzheimer's could start right away, or dementia could start and lead to something else. But statistics say that if you are over the age of 60, there's a 50-50 chance that you could develop dementia or Alzheimer's. There is, at this point, or up to this point, no treatment. You can be given medication to try to help. However, that medication only slows it down so far. There is a new development that I am going to share with you in this podcast that has been discovered. It hasn't been proven yet, but they are trying something else to help out people who have lost some of their cognitive skills. I want to explain to you on a real simple basis how this happens. Dr. Alzheimer's was working in the 1920s. He was working with patients in an insane asylum. People who suffered from what we now know as dementia and Alzheimer's. That had not been diagnosed yet, but Dr. Alzheimer's thought that it had something to do with your brain, something not functioning correctly in your brain. And so he began interviewing people from an insane asylum. And he saw a middle-aged lady one day and said, "Maria, could you tell me what you're feeling and what you are feeling like and what you are thinking?" And she said, "Dr. Alzheimer's, I think I have lost myself." She expressed the fact that she could not recall a number of things. And so she had lost herself. And that made him work even harder on his research. And obviously the disease was named after him after he discovered these simple facts. I've done some little drawings up here that are not, I'm not a doctor, but I do understand what they are saying. We have synapses in our brain. This synapse, for instance, would send a message to this synapse in our brain, in a part of our brain, to say, "I want you to raise your right hand," or "I want you to write the word flood," or whatever. It's a synapse. It's an electrical impulse that passes from one to another. And this would be normally what your brain does. This part of your brain tells this part of your brain what to do. And that message is clear. It goes across the gap to pass that message on for everything that we do, including breathing. Some of that just happens automatically. Well, what happens when dementia or Alzheimer's develops is there could be two things that are happening. One of them is there is a buildup of plaque in between these synapses. So this may be in the central part of your brain, this may be in the front of your brain. The front of your brain is where it has like your math skills and your literary skills. And all of a sudden, a person who's able to take care of a checkbook for years gets confused. In my case, I was talking to my brother, who I believe this next week is going to be diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's. And we were working on his budget because he was having some money problems and I was trying to help him. He's my older brother. And I said, multiply 25 times 6. And he said, "I can't multiply." And I said, "What do you mean you can't multiply?" He said, "I don't know how." We were talking on the phone. I said, "Well, I don't have pen and paper in front of me. You can't multiply 25 times 6. And he said, "No, I can't." The next day, I was talking to him and I said, "Multiply 25 times 6. He said, "It's 150. I said, "Where'd you get that answer?" He said, "In my brain." He didn't need paper and pencil to figure that out. Well, that first day that I was talking to him, this plaque was in a liquid in between. All of these synapses float around in your brain, and the plaque was blocking that message that first day. The second day that I talked to him, evidently that plaque was not there because he was able to think of that. The other thing that happens is tangles. because those synapses are together in your brain like this, and because there is liquid all around them, brain fluid all around them, they float back and forth, okay? And they send messages on the normal, but once in a while, one of them maybe gets tangled up. And when it gets tangled up, the messages go out, but they miss the other synapse. And so again, the person is confused. They can't remember what they want to remember. Plaque is like the plaque that would build up on your teeth. And of course, tangles means it's tangled up. Dr. Alzheimer's named both of those things in his study about the brain. And so we have plaques and tangles. Well, how do you avoid these? You really don't. One of the things that it is suggested for people with Alzheimer's and with dementia is that they stay as active as possible. Work crossword puzzles, read books, get your brain to keep working. Work on your checkbook. Keep writing out checks. Don't use the computer for everything. I think using the computer for banking and that kind of thing has gotten in the way of doing like a regular checkbook. And then all of a sudden we don't know how to do that because, quote unquote, the computer does it for us. So if we retire or get to be an older age and we slow down and we just sit around and watch daytime television, which is terrible, our brain starts to lose the practice of being active. Exercise, using your brain, all of those kinds of things have to help in order to avoid that. However, there is no medicine that you can take to prevent it. Now, I said there's no medicine, but recently I have heard it used to be that in order to determine whether or not somebody was developing dementia, I used to ask people to make a clock drawing for me. And I would say, make that clock read 3:20. Okay? And so they're asked to do a clock. Well, in order to do a clock, you start with a circle. Now, you gotta make that circle big enough to get numbers on. So if the person starts out like this, you say, no, you gotta make it bigger, okay? That's one mistake. You didn't make it big enough. If you have more than 2 mistakes in making this clock, it means your cognitive skills are weak and you possibly have dementia. Okay, put the numbers on, all right? The easiest way to put numbers on is to go 12, 6, 3, and 9. Putting those on first. Now you don't have to do it that way, but it prevents you from doing it and putting 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, not getting them spaced out correctly. That would be another mistake. And so we would try to space these out as well as we can, and they don't have to be exact, but close. And remember, a person with cognitive skills also has to be able to count from 1 to 12, which can be a problem for some people with Alzheimer's. And then we say, okay, we want you to make this 3:20. Well, if you look closely at a clock, you need to have a minute hand and an hour hand. And if you look closely at any clock, you'll see that the minute hand is longer than the hour hand. So that needs to be done. Now, it comes off of a point somewhere near the middle. So that again is a correct location. We want it to say 3:20 and we want it to be the minute hand. And so we're gonna make it that long as the minute hand because the hour hand is gonna be shorter than that. Again, that would be a mistake to make them the same size. And the most common mistake that people make, if it is 3:20, is that minute, that hour hand pointing right at the 3. No, it is not. It is starting to move past the 3. And so when they do the hour hand, it has to be pointing a little bit below the 3. And there would be your 3:20. Okay, so you can make one mistake with the wrong length of hands, another mistake with the minute or hour not being in its correct location, the numbers not arranged the way they should, not drawing the circle big enough, so 2 or more, and you would say that person probably has dementia. Although it's not for sure. It's a drawing, okay? And I want to tell you, the very first one of these that I did, I said to the gentleman, I want you to draw a clock that says 3:20. He said, okay. He took the pen, he drew a rectangle, and he wrote 3:20. There you go. He drew a digital clock, okay? I didn't tell him it had to be a clock with a face on it, so I had to change my language with the others that I drew. Charlie thought he had me fooled, I think, but sometimes Alzheimer and dementia patients can be a lot of fun if you take a good attitude towards them. Okay, so today, my brother, about 3 weeks ago, went to a veterans hospital. He's a Army veteran. And he was told he was going to have a 3-hour test to see if he had dementia or Alzheimer's beginning. I'm pretty sure that he does. I talk to him every day on the phone. He does not. His short-term memory is terrible. And by the way, that's something that happens with Alzheimer's. Their short-term memory is terrible. Their long-term memory, they can remember things from 20, 30 years ago. My mom suffered from Alzheimer's, and she lived to be 91 and had Alzheimer's her last 5 or 6 years. My brother and I used to say, she doesn't know Tuesday from Pittsburgh. And she didn't. And I will demonstrate for you how we talk to her and so forth as I go through the do's and don'ts. However, my dad used to play a squeeze box accordion in a country band in small taverns and stuff in central Illinois. And my mom used to go with him all the time. And they both loved to dance. And there were times that we were told that my mom would get on top of a table and dance on the top of a table. She, just to entertain the people that were there. And if we would say that to her, do you remember getting on top of a table? And she would tell us what songs she danced to. She would tell us what Dad played. That Turkey in the Straw was his closing number all of the time. She remembered all of that from 50 years ago. My dad died when he was 49, and she was in her 90s. She was like 46 when he died, or 45 when he died. So 45 years ago, she could remember what they were doing. However, she couldn't remember whether she had breakfast or not. She couldn't remember whether she played bingo that day, or whether she won, or whether she didn't. My mom, by the way, was called the bingo queen of the nursing home. One day her pastor traveled from Bloomington to Gibson City, which is about a 40-minute trip, to see her. And he got there about 10 o'clock in the morning. And she said, "I'm sorry, I can't see you until 11. And he said, "Why?" She said, "Because I have bingo going on." She had to play bingo first. So he had to go see some other people first and then come back and see her. She was the joy of the nursing home during the time that she was there. Okay, as we look at this, we say, okay, what do we do with people with dementia and Alzheimer's? You know, I have a list of things that I think we can do that helps not only the person with dementia or Alzheimer's, but also helps you as a caregiver. Now, you might not be the major caregiver, but it really doesn't matter. If that person is your spouse, your friend, somebody that you just care about and you visit them once in a while. If you are, right now, my sister-in-law is going through some pretty tough times. She is 89, my brother is 88. She is not real mobile. She had hip surgery about a year ago, walks with a walker, cannot do a lot of things physically, has to depend on him to do that. And he is just not able to do some things anymore. Unfortunately, they live in Arkansas and I live in Illinois. So it is not possible for me to go over there every day, or I would. And we're trying to talk them into moving back to Illinois, but with our recent cold snap, I'm not sure that we're ever going to talk them into that. They'd rather be in Arkansas where it's relatively warm in the wintertime. But her frustration is one day he can do this and the next day he can't. Now, I know a lady who went to live in her mom's home. Her mom lived on the first floor where she didn't have to take steps. She was in her 80s. She had Alzheimer's, and the daughter lived in the basement, and she was in her late 50s, early 60s. One day, Sandy, the daughter, came up the steps and said, "Wow, something smells good." Her mom says, "Yeah, I fixed breakfast for us today." She had fixed bacon, eggs, potatoes, pancakes, a full breakfast. And they sat down and enjoyed that and had a lot of fun that day. The next morning, Sandy walked up those stairs. Her mom was standing in the kitchen in front of the stove, and she was crying. And Sandy said, "Mom, what's wrong?" And she said, "I don't know how to start the stove." That is typical of somebody with Alzheimer's. One day, that plaque or tangle is there. The next day, it might not be. And so some days, they know how to do things. Some days, they don't. They don't do it on purpose. They're not trying to fool you. They're not trying to be a pain for you. My first thing on the list of what we can do for people with dementia and Alzheimer's is we can pray, and we can pray, and we can pray again. Because only the Lord can help you through that situation. One of the things that you need to do on a daily basis is make sure, especially if you're going someplace to visit somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's, is you need to walk in and you need to say, "Hi, Mom, I'm Roy. I'm your second son, the principal from Kankakee, and I'm here to see you today." Instead of walking up to my mom and saying, "Hi, do you know who I am?" Don't quiz them. That makes them feel bad when they can't remember your name. How bad do you feel when you are introduced to somebody and 5 minutes later you think, "I don't know that guy's name"? Well, somebody with Alzheimer's or dementia would feel the same way. One of the other things that we stressed very, very hard at Prairie View is do not argue with somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's. Do not argue. You are not going to win. They are not going to change their mind. You can prevent them from hurting themselves. You can be a friend to them, but don't argue with them. Also, don't be frustrated with the person. Be frustrated with the disease. Pastor Copen, our head pastor, said that to me the other day. He said, we need to make sure that we are telling people who are handling loved ones. I was telling him about somebody who had been an active member of our congregation, and the spouse had developed Alzheimer's, and he wanted me to share that information with Pastor. And he said, well, you make sure that you tell him, don't be frustrated with her, be frustrated with the disease. She's not trying to do that. One of the things that occurs, not always first, but it occurs pretty early, is they lose math skills along with their short-term memory. So if you find your loved one or your friend kind of deteriorating on math skills, you can begin to suspect that perhaps there is something happening with them. One of the other things we have to be careful with is if they tell a story, it doesn't matter if they say, well, this happened 3 months ago, and it really happened 3 days ago. It doesn't matter. Don't correct them. Don't say, no, that was 3 days ago, not 3 months ago. That will only frustrate them. What's the difference if that person thinks it happened 3 months ago? Is that going to make or break anything? No, it's not. So don't correct them. And you have to understand that not every day is the same. I gave you that illustration of the lady who fixed breakfast one day and the next day she was crying because she could not do it. Not every day being the same is one of the most frustrating things to work with, because one day a person doesn't need any help doing anything. The next day they need a lot of help doing something, possibly. Or they could go 2 days or 3 days where things are really good, going well, and then all of a sudden they can't do things that you thought that they could do. I want to give you just a few examples from the people that I worked with at Prairie View. I'm going to use a few names, but I have changed the names to protect the innocent and the guilty. One of them was a preacher's wife. She was the nicest lady, always dressed to the nines. She was in the Alzheimer's unit. Her husband had passed away. Her daughters had brought her to Prairie View and got her admitted there because she needed some help. She was a preacher's wife for over 40 years. Do you know what her problem was while she was at Prairie View? Her problem was, it was F this and F that. She said F-bombs probably 20 times a day. Now that obviously was not coming from her upbringing. Perhaps she had heard that kind of language before, but it was just totally out of her character. And so they tried to help her control that and so forth. Then there was Becky. Becky was a school teacher. When she came to Prairie View, she came into the nursing home, which was the regular facility. One of the things that I did with new patients is at times, depending upon who was there, I went and took their picture. And I said, Becky, I need your picture. And she said, oh, no, yeah, I'm too old. You don't need to take my picture. Well, I had to smooth talk her into a picture because there needs to be one in their records in order to make sure that we're following the laws. And so I had explained that I was a school principal. She explained she was a teacher, and I said, well, if I'm a principal and you're a teacher and the principal tells you what to do, what do you do? Well, I do it. I said, well, then I need to take your picture. Well, Becky eventually had to move into the Alzheimer's unit. Almost every day, when I would get to work a half an hour early on purpose, there would be a note on my desk in my office that says, Becky wants to see you. Or a phone call from the unit saying, could you please come and talk to Becky? When I would go down to see Becky, she would be sitting there crying every morning. And every morning when I would say, Becky, what is wrong? Do you not feel good? Oh, I feel okay, but they stole my horses last night. Well, she and her husband had a ranch or whatever, a farm with horses on it, and she was claiming that somebody was coming in and stealing her horses. And so if I would say, well, we'll talk to the sheriff and I'm sure he can get them back for you or whatever, so you just kind of, pretend with them. And I'd say, Becky, how about depending upon Jesus today? And she'd say, well, what do you mean? And I would say, oh, how I love Jesus. Oh, how I love Jesus. And Becky would sing with me 2-3 songs. And we'd say a little prayer, and she'd be fine for the day. Every day that I was there. I asked the CNAs, I said, what do you guys do when I'm not here on Saturdays and Sundays? They said, well, sometimes she cries for half a day. She's looking for you. I said, can't you find somebody else? They said, we're looking, but so far she wants to see you. That was in her mind. Then there was Helen. Helen would come out of her room to eat, to put puzzles together, to do a project. She had Alzheimer's. Whenever she would re-enter her room, she would begin screaming at the top of her lungs. There are snakes in here! Get the snakes out of here! One of the CNAs would grab the broom that they kept by her door and walk into her room. Helen would wait outside. The CNA would go in and sweep up those snakes by sweeping the floor real quickly and saying, okay, Helen, I got them. And Helen would walk in, she'd be fine for the rest of the day. They couldn't figure out what in the world was going on with Helen until they found out from one of her relatives that when she was 14 or 15 years old, she was playing with her cousins out in a field, and she ran across the field to get away from somebody and fell into a snake pit. Thus, the memory that was coming back to her every time she went into her room. There were times that I would walk into the Alzheimer's unit and 2 guys would come up to me and they'd say, Roy, come here. You got to get down behind this couch. And they would be down behind the couch. I said, what's going on? There's snipers up there on the balcony. They keep shooting at us. Well, they had World War II experience. There was another guy who was not in the Alzheimer's unit, was not suffering from Alzheimer's. Every morning, about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, the nurses would say he would wake up hollering like he was gonna die, howling and crying, and he had been a prisoner of war. And nightly, when he was a prisoner of war for over a year, they came in and whipped his legs. And he was still getting that nightmare of his legs being whipped. We don't know what some people do mentally. And so we have to develop an attitude towards them. Again, they can't help it. Their brain is functioning a different way from what our brain is functioning. Now, I do have a little bit of good news for you. In France, when I was teaching this course at Prairie View, I stopped there in about 2008. So that would be, 18 years ago. At that time, there was a medicine that they were using in France that was supposedly giving some cognitive skills back to people with Alzheimer's. It never got approved in the United States. I don't know if they were afraid of the long-range effects or whatever, but I can't imagine that long-range effects would be something that would deter us from using medicine when you're in that kind of condition. But at any rate, when my brother went to the Veterans Hospital 3 weeks ago, they gave him a blood test. Because I have been told by Dr. Rafi, my son-in-law, who knows a lot about medicine and does a lot of research, that your cognitive skills may be relying on your protein level. And if your protein number is down, you're losing some of your cognitive skills. And they've developed a pill that they can give you that would raise your protein level up back towards its normal. And if you can get it back close to its normal, you can regain some of your cognitive skills. So that may be the future in dementia and Alzheimer's. I'm praying that that would be so for the sake of my brother. He's 88. His wife is 89. We asked them, why are you away from the family down in Arkansas? And they said, well, we came down here for the good weather. And we said, well, but you're having financial problems. Didn't you ever plan to move back to the family? And my sister-in-law said, yes. She said, we didn't plan to move back to Illinois. She said, by this time, we thought we'd both be in heaven. They didn't expect to live to be 88 and 89 or to have the kinds of problems that they're having financially and physically. My brother got very, very upset with the test. It was a one-on-one test with an examiner. He had a blood test, and he'll find out the results this next week as to whether they think his protein level is down. And they will make recommendations about medication for him so that they can either slow it down or stop it or help it get better, which we're praying for. But when he was taking the test, it was supposed to last for 3 hours. His wife could not be with him. She sat in the hallway. She went to the restroom. After an hour and a half, she came out. He had his coat on. She said, what are you doing out here with your coat on? You still got an hour and a half to go. And he said, no, I don't. And the examiner was walking out with him. And she said, and Mary, his wife, said, what happened? The examiner said, he quit. He won't do anymore. And Mary said, Lee, why did you quit? He said, she keeps asking me if I'm going to commit suicide, and I keep telling her no. How many times do I have to tell her that? Well, what was happening, according to the examiner, is they are required, as they hit each section of the test, they are required to say, do you feel safe at home? Do you have any thoughts of suicide, etc.? I explained to him later, of the 28 days out of the 43 that I was in the hospital this spring, I was asked 28 times, do you feel like committing suicide? I said, just say no and move on. They have to ask you those questions. He said, well, the other thing that was happening is they kept giving me this numbers and they wanted me to arrange them in a certain way. He said, I've been a banker all my life. Why do I have to arrange numbers? So Mary said to the examiner, so what do we do? She said, well, this will get evaluated by somebody and you come back next month and we'll give you the results. She said, we don't have to finish the test. We have enough. Well, I think they have enough because obviously they're going to diagnose either dementia or Alzheimer's. And my suspicion is that it's Alzheimer's because things have happened like